I'm Juliet, 26 female. I work as a librarian's assistant in a small, quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knows your family history. I live alone in a tiny apartment above a bakery, surrounded by books that have always been my only true companions. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by the story I was told. I was the adopted one, the outsider brought into a family that already had its own. My entire existence was a lie, carefully constructed by the very people I called Mom and Dad. They weren't my parents, they were my captors. And the truth, when it finally came, wasn't whispered in confidence. It was delivered by a stranger over a casket, holding the key that would either shatter me completely or finally set me free. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up in the house of Marlene and Richard was like being a ghost. I was present but never truly seen. From my earliest memories, I understood that I was different. It wasn't just the adoption story, a tale they told with weary sighs as if my existence was a burden they benevolently shouldered. It was in the fabric of our daily lives. My brother Leo, 2 years my senior, and my sister Chloe, 2 years my junior, were the sun and moon around which our household revolved. I was the distant, forgotten star. Leo was the golden boy. His school achievements were framed and hung in the hallway. His soccer trophies gleamed on the mantelpiece. When he wanted new sneakers, a video game, or a trip with friends, Richard would pull out his wallet without a second thought. Marlene would beam, her eyes shining with a pride she never once directed at me. Chloe was the princess. Her wardrobe overflowed with dresses she'd wear only once. Her tantrums were met with soothing words and promises of new dolls or shopping sprees. She was delicate, precious, and utterly spoiled. My world was starkly different. My clothes were hand-me-downs from Chloe, often ill-fitting and stained, or bargain bin finds that Marlene would purchase with a grimace. My birthdays were afterthoughts, a plain cupcake with a single candle while my siblings had lavish parties with dozens of friends. While they had allowances, I had chores. Endless chores. I was the family's built-in maid. I learned to cook, clean, and do laundry before I was 10 years old. "You have to earn your keep, Juliet," Marlene would say, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "We took you in when no one else wanted you. The least you can do is be useful." Richard was a man of few words, a heavy presence who occupied his armchair like a king on a threadbare throne. He managed a local warehouse and came home each evening smelling of cardboard and exhaustion. He rarely spoke to me directly, offering only grunts of acknowledgement. He was the silent partner in Marlene's cruelty, his indifference a form of consent. He watched as Marlene served Leo and Chloe the best cuts of meat at dinner while sliding a smaller, gristlier portion onto my plate. He said nothing when Chloe accidentally spilled juice on my homework, or when Leo borrowed the one nice thing I owned, a small music box a teacher had given me, and broke it without apology. Their silence was a wall I could never break through. It was my only sanctuary. In the quiet aisles of the library, surrounded by the smell of old paper and ink, I could be someone else. I could travel to distant lands, solve mysteries, and live in worlds where girls like me were heroines, not servants. My teachers saw a quiet, diligent student and praised my grades, but those praises turned to ash the moment I stepped back into that house. Marlene would scoff at my report cards. "Book smarts won't help you scrub a floor, Juliet," she'd sneer. "Don't get any big ideas." The idea that I was unlovable became the bedrock of my identity. I accepted it as fact. After all, my real parents hadn't wanted me, and my adoptive parents treated me as a chore. What other conclusion could there be? I spent my teenage years making myself as small as possible, a mouse scurrying along the baseboards of their lives, trying not to draw attention or cause any trouble. I learned to mask my feelings, to swallow my tears, and to expect nothing. Hope was a dangerous luxury I couldn't afford. When I turned 18, I moved out. I had saved every dollar I'd ever earned from part-time jobs, hiding the money in a loose floorboard under my bed. I found a tiny apartment and a job at the town library, the place that had always felt more like home than my actual home. The freedom was dizzying. For the first time, I could buy my own clothes, eat what I wanted, and live without the constant fear of Marlene's criticism or Chloe's spite. Yet the chains of my upbringing were long. I continued to visit them ever. Why Sunday for dinner, an obligation I couldn't bring myself to break? It was a pathetic attempt to prove I was a good daughter, still hoping to earn a crumb of the affection they showered on Leo and Chloe. These dinners were always the same. Leo would boast about his sales commissions, Chloe would complain about her life while scrolling through her phone, and Marlene would find a way to criticize my job, my apartment, or my appearance. Still working in that dusty old library. "You'll never meet a husband in there," she'd say, "and that sweater makes you look washed out." Richard would just sit there, chewing his food, a silent monument to my insignificance. I kept going back, week after week, like a moth drawn to a flame that had only ever burned me. Part of me believed that if I was patient enough, dutiful enough, they would finally see me. They would finally love me. This sad, desperate cycle continued for 8 years, a testament to how deeply they had broken me. I was 26 years old, and I was still that little girl hoping for a kind word, a gentle touch, a sign that I mattered. I didn't know then that the entire foundation of my pain was built on a lie more monstrous than I could ever imagine. The illusion was about to be shattered, not by a change of heart, but by a death. Richard, the silent king, had a sudden, massive heart attack at work, and at his funeral, my real life was about to begin. Richard's death was as quiet and undramatic as his life. He collapsed between aisles of stacked pallets at the warehouse, and that was that. Marlene's grief was loud and performative. She wailed about losing her soulmate, the love of her life, a man she had spent the last 8 years criticizing for not earning enough money to fund her and Chloe's desired lifestyle. Leo and Chloe flanked her, playing the part of devastated children, their faces arranged in masks of sorrow that didn't quite reach their eyes. I, on the other hand, felt a confusing numbness. How do you mourn a man who was a void in your life? I felt a flicker of something, perhaps the loss of a possibility, the death of the faint, foolish hope that one day he might see me, speak to me, be a father to me. I did my duty. I cooked, I cleaned, I answered the door for condolence bringers, and I managed the funeral arrangements because Marlene was too distraught, Chloe was too sensitive, and Leo was too busy making calls. I was, as always, the help. The funeral was a somber affair held at a local church. The pews were filled with neighbors and Richard's coworkers, their faces a blur of polite sympathy. I sat in the front row with my family, a silent observer in my own life's drama. Marlene clutched a handkerchief, Leo stared straight ahead with a look of stoic importance, and Chloe dabbed at her dry eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. I felt utterly alone, an island in a sea of performative grief. A few days later, we gathered at a lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The room was small and stuffy, smelling of old paper and leather. Marlene, dressed in expensive black, sat upright, a hawk waiting to claim her prize. Leo and Chloe sat on either side of her, their expressions a mixture of feigned solemnity and greedy anticipation. I sat slightly apart near the door, expecting nothing. I was right. The lawyer, a portly man named Mr. Gable, cleared his throat and began to read. The house, a modest 3-bedroom split-level, was left to Marlene as expected. His pension and life insurance, a surprisingly substantial sum, were also hers. Then came the individual bequests. To his beloved son, Leo, Richard left his vintage watch and a trust fund of $50,000. To his cherished daughter, Chloe, he left his car and an identical trust fund of $50,000. Mr. Gable paused, shuffled his papers, and looked over his spectacles at me. "And to Juliet," he read, his voice flat, "he leaves the contents of the lockbox in his closet, along with his hopes that she continues to be a useful and self-sufficient person." The contents of a lockbox, not a name, not my daughter, just Juliet. The words useful and self-sufficient were a final, posthumous slap in the face. It was the language of an employer, not a father. Humiliation burned in my cheeks. Leo smirked, a quick, cruel twitch of his lips. Chloe let out a small, condescending sigh, as if my meager inheritance was an embarrassment to her. Marlene, however, wasn't satisfied. "The lockbox, is that it?" she snapped at the lawyer. "What's in it?" "I am not privy to that information, ma'am," Mr. Gable replied coolly. The key has been left for Juliet. Later that day, back at the house that was no longer even nominally mine, Marlene handed me a small, tarnished brass key. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Go get your treasure. Don't expect to find gold doubloons." I walked up the stairs to their bedroom, a room I had rarely entered. Its smell. D of Richard's Old Spice and Marlene's floral perfume. The closet was packed with his drab, sensible clothes. In the back, on a high shelf behind a stack of old shoe boxes, was a small metal lockbox. It was surprisingly light. I took it back to my old bedroom, the smallest in the house, which was already being converted into Chloe's content creation studio. Sitting on the edge of the bed where I'd cried myself to sleep so many nights, I turned the key. The lock clicked open. Inside, there was no treasure. There was only a thin stack of papers, held together by a rusty paperclip and a small, faded photograph. The photo was of a baby with a tuft of dark hair and wide, curious eyes. Me. On the back, in Richard's spidery handwriting, were 2 words, "Jane's girl." The papers were old and yellowed. The top one was a birth certificate for a baby girl named Lily. The parents' names were not Marlene and Richard. They were Michael and Elizabeth Grace. The date of birth matched mine. Beneath it were what looked like financial ledgers, a list of dates and cash withdrawals. Large sums, $10,000 here, $5,000 there, all within the first year of my life. The final document was a handwritten, unsigned letter. It felt like Richard's voice, though I'd so rarely heard it. Marlene wanted a girl. Chloe wasn't enough. She saw the ad. The money was just sitting there from my inheritance. It was supposed to be a private arrangement, no papers, no trail, just take the baby and go. But the woman, Jane, she got greedy. Kept asking for more, threatened to go to the police. I had to keep paying. I told Marlene we should give her back, but she wouldn't. She said the girl was ours now. We moved towns, changed our story, said she was adopted. I never felt right about it. Never. Maybe this is my penance. My hands trembled as I read the words over and over. Private arrangement. The ad, give her back, it wasn't an adoption, it was some kind of transaction. A purchase. They had bought me. The cruelty, the chores, the constant reminders to be useful, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I wasn't their daughter, I was their property. A long-term investment that they resented having to maintain. The coldness, the distance, it wasn't because I was adopted. It was because I was a secret they had to live with every day, a constant reminder of a crime. The word kidnapped hadn't formed in my mind yet, but the seed of that terrible truth was planted. I stared at the name on the birth certificate, Lily Grace. It felt like a name from another world, a name belonging to a girl who was loved, a girl who had a real family, a girl who wasn't me. I looked at the photo of the baby, and for the first time, I didn't see an unwanted adoptee. I saw a stolen child. The funeral reception was held in the somber, wood-paneled hall of the church. People milled about with paper plates of catered sandwiches, speaking in hushed tones. I moved through the room on autopilot, refilling drinks and clearing away plates, slipping back into my familiar role as the family servant. Marlene was holding court in the center of the room, soaking up the sympathy, while Leo and Chloe stood beside her looking bored. Richard's lockbox and its disturbing contents felt like a lead weight in my gut. Jane's girl, Lily Grace. The names echoed in my head, a drumbeat of confusion and fear. I had just placed a tray of empty glasses on a table when an older man I didn't recognize approached me. He was tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the polite, vacant expression I wore. He was dressed in a simple, dark suit that had seen better days, but he held himself with a quiet dignity that set him apart from the other mourners. "You must be Juliet," he said. His voice was calm and steady. "I am," I replied, forcing a small, tired smile. "Have we met?" "No, we haven't," he said, his gaze unwavering. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm an old acquaintance of the family, from a long time ago." He glanced around the room, at Marlene surrounded by her circle of sympathizers. "I wasn't sure if I should come today, but when I read the obituary, I knew I had to. I had to see you." There was an intensity in his stare that made me uneasy. "I'm sorry. I don't recall Richard or Marlene ever mentioning you. They wouldn't have, he said, a hint of sadness in his voice. Juliet, what I'm about to say is going to be difficult to hear, especially today, but I've waited over 20 years for this. I can't wait any longer. He guided me gently toward a quiet corner of the hall, away from the hum of conversation. My heart began to pound, a nervous flutter in my chest. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Arthur began, his voice low. The story you've been told about your life, it isn't true, you're not adopted. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. What are you talking about? Of course I am. It was the one certainty, the one solid fact my entire identity had been built upon. He shook his head slowly. No, you were taken. He paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. You're not Juliet, your name is Lily Grace, and you were kidnapped from your parents' backyard when you were just 6 months old. The world tilted on its axis. The muted sounds of the reception faded into a dull roar in my ears. Lily Grace. The name from the birth certificate in the lockbox. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, and I reached out a hand to steady myself against the wall. How do you know that? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Arthur reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he carefully extracted a folded, yellowed piece of newsprint. He unfolded it and held it out for me to see. It was a newspaper clipping, dated 26 years ago. The headline read, "Infant girl vanishes from suburban home." Below it was a grainy black and white photograph of a distraught-looking couple, a man and a woman clinging to each other. And next to them, a picture of a baby. It was the same baby from the photograph in Richard's lockbox. My baby picture. Your parents, Michael and Elizabeth Grace, never stopped searching for you, Arthur said softly. They spent every penny they had. They hired dozens of investigators over the years. I was one of them. My eyes scanned the article. It described a perfect summer afternoon, a baby sleeping in a pram on a patio while her mother was inside for just a moment. When she came back out, the pram was empty. There were no witnesses, no ransom note, just gone. The article mentioned the parents' heartbreak, the massive police search, the community in shock. I've been on this case, officially and unofficially, for 2 decades, Arthur continued, his eyes filled with a weary determination. The trail went cold almost immediately, but I never gave up. I had my suspicions about a number of people, but I could never prove anything. A few years ago, I got a tip about a couple who had privately adopted a baby girl around the same time you disappeared, a couple who had moved towns shortly after. That couple was Marlene and Richard. He pulled out another clipping, this one smaller. It was a classified ad from an old newspaper. Help wanted, a loving family seeks to privately adopt a baby girl, all expenses paid. This was their cover, Arthur explained. They could claim they got you through an ad if anyone asked. I tried to get close to find proof, but they were a closed book. Richard worked, Marlene stayed home, and no one in their new town knew their history. I had nothing concrete, until I saw Richard's obituary in the paper this week. I knew this was my only chance, that secrets often come out when people die. I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling, trying to connect the dots. The private arrangement from Richard's letter, the name Lily Grace, the payments to a woman named Jane. Marlene couldn't have children after Leo and Chloe, Arthur said, as if reading my thoughts. I found that out from old medical records. She was desperate for another baby, another girl. It became an obsession. I believe Richard went along with it, and they found someone, this Jane person, probably, who was willing to snatch a child for them, for a price. He looked at me, his expression full of a deep, profound empathy that I had never seen on the faces of the people who raised me. Your real parents are good people, Juliet, Lily. They have lived in a state of purgatory for 26 years, never knowing if you were alive or dead. They set up a reward fund the week you were taken, and they've added to it every year. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. The reward money for information leading to your safe return, it's over $1 million now. The days following the funeral were a blur. Arthur's revelation had detonated a bomb in the center of my life, and I was stumbling through the wreckage, trying to make sense of the debris. Kidnapped. My name was Lily Grace. My parents were out there, searching for me. The words looped in my mind, a dizzying, terrifying mantra. I met Arthur at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town 2 days later. He had suggested we talk somewhere public but discreet. I clutched the lockbox, which I had brought with me, its contents feeling both damning and redemptive. I hadn't slept, my mind racing with questions, doubts, and a white-hot anger that was starting to burn through the shock. Arthur listened patiently as I recounted the story of my life in that house. The chores, the neglect, the constant feeling of being an outsider. I told him about the will reading, the final insult of being called useful. Finally, my voice trembling, I opened the lockbox and showed him Richard's letter, the birth certificate, and the photograph. He examined each item carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he read Richard's scribbled confession, he let out a long, slow breath. "This is it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is the corroboration I've been looking for. This confession, combined with the birth certificate, this is the proof." He looked at me, his sharp eyes softening. "Lily," he said, trying out the name. It sounded foreign, like a word in a language I didn't speak. "This must be overwhelming." I just nodded, unable to form words. He was right. It was a tsunami of emotion. There was the blinding rage at Marlene and Richard for stealing my life, for treating me with such calculated cruelty. There was a deep, aching grief for the 26 years I had lost, for the childhood I never had with the parents who loved me. And beneath it all, there was a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. A hope that I might finally belong somewhere. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice small. "The first step is a DNA test," Arthur explained calmly. "It's the only way to be 100% certain before we approach Michael and Elizabeth. I have a contact at a reputable lab. It will be discreet and fast. We just need a sample from you." The process was simple, a quick swab of my cheek right there in the diner's restroom. Arthur handled it with the sterile efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times. As he sealed the evidence bag, he laid out the next steps. "While we wait for the results, it should take about a week. We need to gather more information," he said, shifting into investigator mode. "Marlene is the key. Richard was weak, an enabler, but she was the architect of this. We need to find out what she knows about Jane, the woman who took you. We need to understand the full scope of the crime." The thought of confronting Marlene made my stomach churn with a familiar childhood fear, but it was different now. The fear was mingled with a cold, hard resolve. She had taken everything from me. I would not let her hide from the truth. "How do we do that?" I asked. "We play on her greed," Arthur said, a glint in his eye. "You are going to go back to that house. You are going to tell her you've been contacted by a lawyer about a discrepancy in your adoption papers. Tell her this lawyer represents a trust left by your birth mother, a woman who has since passed away. A substantial trust." The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Money was the only land. Gwaj Marlene truly understood. "You'll say that to claim the inheritance, you need her to help you find the original adoption records and the name of the agency or intermediary," he continued. "You'll be upset, confused. You'll play the part of the dutiful daughter who needs her mother's help. Her reaction will tell us everything." Going back to that house felt different this time. When I walked through the door, I wasn't Juliet, the unwanted servant. I was Lily Grace, a stolen daughter, walking into the den of my kidnappers. The house itself seemed smaller, the furniture shabbier, the air thick with the stench of lies. Marlene was in the living room, flipping through a home shopping catalog. Chloe was on the sofa, taking selfies. Leah was nowhere to be seen. "What do you want?" Marlene asked without looking up. I took a deep breath, picturing Arthur's calm, determined face. I let my voice shake, summoning the practiced vulnerability I had used for years to survive in this house. "Mom, something's happened. I need your help." That got her attention. She put down her catalog. "What is it now?" I told her the story Arthur and I had concocted. I spoke of a lawyer, a trust fund, and a deceased birth mother. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. At the mention of money, her eyes, which were usually dull with boredom, sharpened with a predatory gleam. "A trust fund, how much?" she demanded, her voice cutting straight to the point. "The lawyer said it's significant," I stammered, playing my part. "But there's a problem. He says the adoption on file looks strange, almost incomplete. To access the money, I need the original paperwork. I need the name of the agency or the person who arranged it. I thought you would know." A flicker of panic crossed her face, so fast I almost missed it. She quickly masked it with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, that was so long ago. It was a private thing, all very hush-hush. I can't remember the details." "But you must have the papers somewhere," I pressed, letting a note of desperation creep into my voice. "The lawyer said it could be a lot of money, enough to help everyone, pay off the mortgage, help Chloe with her career." I saw Chloe's head pop up from her phone at the mention of money for her. Marlene's mind was clearly racing. The greed was warring with the fear. "I might have a box in the attic," she said slowly, her eyes narrowed. "I'll have to look. Don't you worry, Juliet. We'll get to the bottom of this. We're your family, after all. We'll help you get what's yours." The hypocrisy of her words was nauseating. As I left the house that day, I knew Arthur was right. She would lead us straight to the truth, not out of love or maternal duty, but for a cut of a fortune that didn't even exist. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the DNA results that would confirm who I really was. The wait was the hardest part. Every hour felt like a year, every day a lifetime. I was on the precipice of a new life, and the fall was terrifying. The call from Arthur came exactly 1 week after our meeting at the diner. I was at the library, shelving books in the history section, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip the spines. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I saw his name on the screen and my breath hitched. I ducked into a deserted aisle between shelves of dusty encyclopedias and answered. "The results are in," Arthur said, his voice steady. "It's a 99.999% match, Lily. You are the daughter of Michael and Elizabeth Grace. There is no doubt." The book I was holding slipped from my fingers and fell to the carpeted floor with a soft thud. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the bookshelf, my eyes squeezed shut. It was real, all of it. A single hot tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering validation. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't unwanted. I was loved. I was missed. I was Lily. "What happens now?" I whispered into the phone. "Now we decide how you want to proceed," Arthur replied gently. "I can contact Michael and Elizabeth. I can prepare them, tell them their daughter has been found. Or we can continue with our plan to expose Marlene. The choice is yours. This is your life." A fierce, protective anger surged through me, eclipsing the fear and uncertainty. Marlene and her family had lived comfortably on their lives for 26 years while my real parents suffered. They didn't deserve a quiet exit. They deserved to be exposed. They deserved to pay for what they did, and I wanted to be the one to do it. "We continue with the plan," I said, my voice stronger now. "But we're going to add a new layer to it, the reward money. You said it's over $1 million. "That's right," Arthur confirmed. "Then that's what we'll use," I said, an idea forming in my mind, cold and clear as ice. "Marlene thinks she's chasing a fake inheritance. Let's make her chase a real one." Our Yield plan was audacious. Arthur, posing as a representative from the inheritance law firm, would contact Marlene directly. He would explain that in order to release the funds, they needed to verify my identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. The best way to do this, he would suggest, was to unseal the records of my birth, which would require an official inquiry. He would mention that during their preliminary research, they had come across an old missing persons case for a baby girl named Lily Grace, and that there were some unsettling similarities. He would then mention the multi-million-dollar reward for information on that case. The bait was irresistible. A choice between a fictional inheritance that was becoming complicated and a very real, very large reward that she could claim simply by providing information. To get the reward, she would have to admit what she knew. She would have to turn on Jane and confess her own role in the crime. She would have to incriminate herself, all for the love of money. Arthur made the call a day later. I sat beside him in his small, cluttered office, listening on speakerphone as he masterfully played his role. He was professional, slightly aloof, and dangled the reward money in front of her like a hypnotist's watch. $1 million, Marlene's voice crackled over the speaker, sharp with avarice. For information? What kind of information? Information leading to the recovery of Lily Grace or the prosecution of those responsible for her disappearance, Arthur recited coolly. Our firm simply noted the resemblance and the overlapping timelines. We have a legal duty to report it. However, if a family member, such as yourself, were to come forward with clarifying information, it would certainly expedite matters. And, of course, position you as the primary claimant for the reward. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the greed wrestling with the instinct for self-preservation. Greed won. I may know something, she stammered. This private arrangement, it was always a bit shady. The woman we dealt with, I never trusted her. I have a name and an old address. I kept it just in case. She was already crafting her story, positioning herself as a victim, an unwitting participant. It was exactly what we had predicted. I see, Arthur said smoothly. In that case, I suggest you come to our office to provide a formal statement. Bring any and all documentation you have. If your information is credible, we can begin the process of filing the claim on your behalf. He gave her the address of a corporate meeting space he had rented for the occasion. The meeting was set for 2 days later. She took the bait, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me as Arthur ended the call. Hook, line, and sinker, he agreed. But it's not just about her confession, Lily, it's about justice. When she walks into that room, she won't be meeting with a lawyer. She'll be meeting with the police. Arthur had already been in contact with a detective in the cold case division, a man he had known for years. He had laid out the whole story, presenting Richard's letter and the DNA results. The police were on board, waiting for Marlene to walk into their trap. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. My anger was a shield, but underneath it I was terrified. What if she backed out? What if she realized it was a setup? But my primary emotion was a profound, aching sadness for my real parents. While I was preparing to confront my kidnapper, they were still out there, living their lives, completely unaware that the daughter they had lost was alive and about to come home. Arthur had asked me if I was ready to see them. He had photos. I said no. Not yet. I wanted to close this chapter first. I wanted to face the monster who had stolen my life before I could embrace the people who had given it to me. I needed to see Marlene's world crumble before I could start building my own. The reckoning was coming, and I would be there to watch it burn. The rented law office was on the 7th floor of a sterile, modern glass building. It was a conference room with a long, polished table and a panoramic view of the city. 2 men in suits, who Arthur introduced to me as Detectives Miller and Hayes, were already there, setting up discreet recording equipment. They had a quiet, professional competence that I found reassuring. I sat in a chair in the corner of the room, out of the direct line of sight from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a spectator at the final act of my own tragedy. Marlene arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Leo and Chloe. They had clearly come as a united front, ready to claim their prize. Marlene was dressed in her best suit, a predatory smile plastered on her face. Leo looked smug and entitled, already spending the money in his head. Chloe was tapping away on her phone, probably live-tweeting the family fortune she was about to receive. They didn't see me in the corner. Their focus was entirely on Arthur, who stood to greet them, the picture of a distinguished attorney. "Mrs. Turner, thank you for coming," Arthur said, his voice formal. "Please have a seat. These are my associates." He gestured to the 2 detectives. Marlene, Leo, and Chloe sat down opposite them. Marlene placed a worn manila folder on the table. "I have everything here," she announced, her voice filled with self-importance. The name of the woman, Jane Porter, the last known address we had for her, and my own statement detailing how we were deceived. Detective Miller leaned forward. "Before we begin, Mrs. Turner, we just need to clarify a few things for the record. This is a formal statement regarding a missing persons case. You understand that providing false information to law enforcement is a serious offense." Marlene's smile tightened. "Of course, I am here to help find that poor, lost child. I want to see justice done." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. For the next 20 minutes, she wove a masterful tapestry of lies. She painted herself as a naive, desperate woman who wanted to give a child a good home. She described Jane Porter as a manipulative criminal who had preyed on her good nature, convincing her that the baby's mother didn't want her. She claimed they had paid a fee they believed was for legal and medical expenses, only to have Jane demand more money later. "We were scared," Marlene said, dabbing a dry eye with a tissue. "We had already grown to love little Juliet. We didn't know what to do, so we moved away to protect her. We were victims in this too." Leo nodded along, adding details about how confused and frightened his parents had been. Chloe said nothing, looking utterly bored by the entire proceeding. Finally, Detective Miller held up a hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Turner. That's a very detailed story, but we have a few other pieces of evidence to consider." He slid a file across the table. "This is a copy of your late husband's final letter." Marlene's face went pale. She stared at the photocopy of Richard's confession as if it were a snake. "He seems to remember things a little differently," the detective continued, his voice hardening. "He writes that you wanted a girl, that you saw an ad, and that you refused to give her back even when you knew it was wrong." That's not true," Marlene stammered, her composure cracking. "Richard was a confused man at the end. He was sick." "We also have this," Detective Hayes added, sliding another document across the table. It was the DNA report with the 99.999% match clearly highlighted. "The girl you call Juliet is, in fact, Lily Grace. There is no question." The room fell silent. Marlene stared at the papers, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Leo's smug expression had vanished, replaced by dawning horror. Chloe finally looked up from her phone, her eyes wide. And then I stood up from my chair in the corner. "Hello, Marlene," I said. Her head snapped toward me. Her eyes widened, and a strangled gasp escaped her lips. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine, undiluted fear on her face. "Juliet," she breathed, "what are you doing, There." "My name is Lily," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "And you are not my mother. You are my kidnapper. You stole me from a family that loved me, and you raised me like a servant in your house of lies. You complained about the cost of raising me while my real parents were adding to a reward fund to get me back." I looked at Leo and Chloe, whose faces were now ashen. "And you too," I said, my voice dripping with the contempt I had suppressed for 26 years. "You enjoyed every minute of it. You watched me scrub floors and wear your cast-off clothes while you got everything you ever wanted. You are just as guilty as she is." "This is a mistake, a misunderstanding," Marlene shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Juliet, tell them how much we loved you." "Loved me?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You never loved me. I was a possession, a secret you resented. Richard knew it was wrong. In his own weak way, he tried to leave me the truth. But you would have taken it to your grave." Detective Miller stood up. "Marlene Turner, you are under arrest for the kidnapping of Lily Grace. You have the right to remain silent." As he recited her rights and cuffed her hands behind her back, Marlene's facade shattered completely. She started screaming, calling my name, calling me ungrateful, a liar. Leo was frozen in his chair, staring into space, while Chloe burst into tears, wailing about how this would ruin her social media following. The police led a struggling, shouting Marlene out of the room. Leo and Chloe were told they were being taken in for questioning as accessories. As they were escorted out, Chloe looked at me, her face streaked with mascara. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "We're your family." "No," I said, meeting her gaze with a steadiness that felt brand new. "You're not." When they were gone, the room was quiet again. I stood by the window, looking down at the city below, and took my first deep, clean breath in 26 years. It was over. The lies were broken, the truth was out, and justice was finally beginning. Arthur came and stood beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. I knew what he was asking. Was I ready to meet my real parents? Was I ready to be Lily? I turned to him, and for the first time in my life, I smiled a real, genuine smile. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready to go home." Arthur drove me to a small, charming house in a town 2 hours away. It was the same house I had been taken from, the one my parents, Michael and Elizabeth, had refused to leave, always holding out hope that I would one day find my way back. Every detail of the drive is seared into my memory. The way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the nervous rhythm of my own breathing, the reassuring presence of Arthur in the driver's seat. He had called them from the car, simply telling them he was on his way and that he had news about Lily. He didn't tell them he had me with him. He wanted that moment to be theirs alone. When we pulled up to the curb, I saw them. They were standing on the front porch, clinging to each other, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and decades of anxiety. My father, Michael, was tall with kind eyes and the same dark hair I had. My mother, Elizabeth, was smaller, with a warm, gentle face that I felt I recognized from a dream. As I stepped out of the car, my mother's hand flew to her mouth. A sob escaped her, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and recognition. My father took a stumbling step forward, his eyes locked on mine, filled with a love so powerful it felt like a physical force. I didn't know what to do, what to say. So I just stood there on the sidewalk, a 26-year-old woman who felt like a lost little girl. Elizabeth was the first to move. She ran down the porch steps and across the small lawn, never taking her eyes off me. She stopped just a few feet away, as if afraid I was a mirage that would vanish if she got too close. "Lily," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. I nodded, a tear of my own finally breaking free and rolling down my cheek. "Mom." That one word was all it took. She closed the distance between us and wrapped her arms around me, holding me with a strength that belied her small frame. She was sobbing, repeating my name over and over again like a prayer. My father was right behind her, his arms encircling us both, his tears falling into my hair. For the first time in my life, I was home. I was held not out of duty, but out of a fierce, all-consuming love. We stood on that lawn for a long time, a family reunited, piecing together the broken parts of our hearts. The days and weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding. My parents gave me space, but also showered me with the affection I had craved my entire life. They showed me my nursery, which they had kept exactly as it was, a perfect time capsule from 1999. They pulled out photo albums filled with pictures of a baby I barely recognized, but who was undeniably me. They told me stories about their lives, about their endless search, about the foundation they had started to help other families of missing children. They had channeled their grief into helping others, and their capacity for love was boundless. There was awkwardness, of course. We were strangers in some ways, learning each other's habits, likes, and dislikes. But the connection was instantaneous and profound. I found out I had my father's laugh and my mother's love for gardening. They loved that I worked in a library, as my mother had been an English teacher. It felt like my life, even in the shadows, had been unconsciously echoing theirs. The legal proceedings against the Turners moved forward. Marlene, faced with Richard's confession and the overwhelming DNA evidence, was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to a significant prison term. Her greed had been her undoing. Leo and Chloe were convicted as accessories after the fact for helping their mother hide the crime for years and for attempting to profit from it. They received shorter sentences and probation. The house, the trust funds, everything was seized as part of the legal penalties. They lost everything they had built on my stolen childhood. I felt no pity for them, only a quiet finality. They were a closed chapter in a book I no longer had to read. The reward money, over $1 million, was legally mine. My parents insisted I take it, saying it was the first payment on a debt that could never truly be repaid. I used a portion of it to help them with their foundation. The rest I put aside, a nest egg for a future I was finally free to build on my own terms. I changed my name legally to Lily Juliet Grace, keeping a piece of the name I had lived with, but claiming the one that was rightfully mine. It's been a year now. I moved to be closer to my parents, and I found a job at the local university library. I am surrounded by books and by a love that is unconditional and real. Sometimes, the scars of my past ache. A harsh word or a moment of feeling overlooked can send a phantom chill through me. But then my mom will call just to say hello, or my dad will send me a funny picture, and the chill vanishes, replaced by a warmth that fills every corner of my soul. I am learning what it means to be a daughter, to be cherished, to be seen. I am learning that I am not useful, I am valuable. I am not an outsider. I am the missing piece that has finally been returned to its rightful place. My name is Lily Grace, and after 26 years in the shadows, I am finally stepping into the light.